I'm doing some first impression videos where I'm checking out like lighter fare stuff with a little more humor to it. Just trying to find some stuff to kind of balance out the heavier anime that I've been reviewing lately. Also trying to look for maybe some kind of show that I can cover that would be like counter programming, just to add sort of like a wider array of things that might interest a wider group of people to the channel. Think of these as like pilot episodes. If I find people are interested in something that I enjoy watching, we can have a couple shows going at once. And for this first impression video, I'm talking about Cells at Work. And I watched the first 2 episodes of Cells at Work, and I really had a pretty good time watching those. It was a really nice change of pace compared to pretty much anything else I've watched so far. So I'm really eager to talk about that. Hopefully there's some Cells at Work fans out there. I decided to check this out because in my sort of like higher education, I studied a fair amount of human immunology, physiology, human anatomy. So I thought I ought to be all prepared to jump into this one, right? I mean, I've been so incredibly lost in my initial viewing of a lot of other things that this one should be a pretty easy entry point for me, like no barrier to entry at all. And, you know, sometimes it's fun to see something you're familiar with. And I'd also heard a lot of recommendations for this show, and most of those recommendations did come from people with no real biology background, no reason to think they might even have a particular interest in this kind of stuff, and they still found it enjoyable. So once again, I just had to see what it was all about. Now, this story is set inside a human body, and we have cells that are sort of anthropomorphized. You know, the cells are characters, are like humans with particular jobs. And it takes place primarily in the circulatory system. And I think that makes a lot of sense because the circulatory system goes pretty much everywhere. So there's not really any sort of topics that couldn't be covered from the perspective of the circulatory system. So, you know, pretty smart decision there. Now, the point of view character is this red blood cell, and, you know, a particular red blood cell amongst millions of red blood cells. I think the show starts out, maybe it's the theme song or the introduction says there's like 7 trillion cells in a human body, but we follow one point of view cell, a red blood cell who is new on the job. And because she's new on the job, she has to learn how things work. And as this red blood cell is learning about how the body works, the viewer kind of gets to learn with her. So it's a bit of an audience surrogate there. A pretty good storytelling device, in my opinion. I think it's a good strategy to get the basic stuff across along with the more complicated stuff and to give us somebody to root for in these conflicts that are going to pop up. The primary supporting character is this guy who is a white blood cell. Specifically, he's a neutrophil, and by episode 2, they're making a point of differentiating a white blood cell in general from sort of the more specific types of white blood cells. But he's kind of heroic, you know, he's drawn to look suggestive of your classic hero in an action story. And the white blood cells do fight bacteria, so he is a fighter. And also, I just want to say that the storytellers don't seem to oversimplify it at all. I mean, I would have to think it would be pretty tempting to try and dumb the story down in favor of action or to just simplify the writing or maybe to not have confidence in the intelligence of your audience and try to dumb it down. But they resist all those temptations and they come up with a really good show that treats things pretty seriously, but also I think probably has broad appeal. It's a really tricky line that they're walking here, and I think they do it right. And in the episodes I watched, the antagonists are primarily bacteria, and the show includes a lot of like accurate microbiology about those bacteria. Another nice touch there. And I'm not like a microbiologist with the extensive knowledge, but I think I have above average knowledge, and it all checks out with me. So that's a plus. And now I'm starting to worry about how this is coming across, because I know I'm describing like the detail, and I'm describing like the biological and physiological accuracy, and I'm getting a little like nerdy about the science of it. And that might make it sound dry. It might even make it sound like something a teacher would force you to watch in science class. But please make no mistake, it's fun. I mean, this show is really fun. I was surprised at how fun it was, just as much as I was surprised by how accurate it is. And believe it or not, it has some really cool action scenes. You know, the white blood cells, they use knives to fight against the germs, which is what they call the bacteria in the episodes I watch. And then these bacteria have monster-like powers, but they're kind of accurate microbiologically speaking. I mean, of course, they're sensationalized and they put a little bit of an effect to it, but surprisingly, it's not bunk. I mean, it's not hubbub, magic, whatever you want to call it. It has a direct, literal correspondent in the microbiology of the bacteria they're talking about. It's kind of a fun way to watch something. And I'm seeing it from two different points of view. The person who's a new anime watcher, and then the guy who studied science for like 24 years. And also, despite all this educational aspect to it and all this reality-based depictions of physiology, despite all that, it's kind of relaxing. Or for me at least, it's very relaxing. Maybe the most relaxing anime I've seen so far. I know how the rules of this world work, so I'm not feeling lost or trying to get caught up or figure out these little mysteries or anything. I'm not constantly trying to pore over every detail for analysis. I'm not looking for a villainous plan. I can just take the story that they give me and enjoy it at face value, or I can also look a little bit deeper at the science if I want. This is a relaxing watch for me, compared to the other stuff I've been watching. And also, just given the way the show's written and the nature of it, I think there's probably a pretty low probability that there's going to be like a shocking character death, or like I'm going to get super attached to a character and then they're going to be killed unexpectedly. I mean, they totally could do that with a hemolytic bacteria like we see in the first episode. They could totally have something like that happen. Just the tone of it, I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to get to stick with our red blood cell and our white blood cell throughout at least this season. So like I said, for me, it's kind of nice to just sit back, kick my feet up, watch, and just let the story wash over me. Sometimes you like those nice, comforting, relaxing stories. Sometimes you like to just take a break from the world. This is pretty good for that. I also enjoy seeing how the artistry of the show is going to depict a particular biological phenomenon. And the art is pretty standard. I would call it standard, and I don't mean that as any kind of insult. I just mean it's straightforward art. I don't think they're really taking any risks here with the art. It's all kind of tried and true. But the appeal for me is seeing how things are represented, because they're pretty clever with that. I mean, there are Easter eggs in a show about cells in the human body. Or at least they seem like Easter eggs to me. Like, for example, there are these red hats that all the red blood cells wear. And when you see a top-down view, the center of this round red hat has a smooth indentation in it. I would call that an umbo. And the cool thing about that is if you've ever seen microscopic images of actual red blood cells or erythrocytes, they look like that. They have that double indentation. And that's just kind of cool. They don't directly draw your attention to it, so you're not losing anything if you don't notice it. But then if you do notice it, and the fact they're not pointing it out, you just kind of catch on to it, I got a little bit of a thrill, or I found it like a little bit of a treat. They have a dendrite that they pass by from time to time. And a dendrite is part of a neuron, and it branches. So they've got it represented as this big tree with all these tree branches coming off. I just thought that was pretty clever, finding one thing in nature that kind of mirrors something else in nature, one thing that's on a macro level that we're all going to be familiar with to mirror something on a micro level that some of us may or may not be familiar with. I just thought it was a nice touch. And then something that really got me, and this is a little more advanced, so I was impressed with just how much the storytellers understand the cells they're writing about and that they're telling the story about. But at one point, the red blood cell, the main character that we're following, she approaches a capillary, and there's this sign up that on the sign it states, only one red blood cell allowed at a time. And I got kind of a kick out of that because that's sort of referring to something called rouleau phenomenon. There are these tiny little capillaries that if you see a microscopic image of a cross-section, it's one blood cell. They can just fit one blood cell at a time, and they're all stacked up. And I remember the name rouleau because it kind of sounds like Rolos. And if you're familiar with the candy that you can get, Rolos, and it's one Rolo stacked all next to each other, or Mentos stack it up the same way, kind of looks like that. So that was a really deep inside joke there that if you don't get it, that's fine. But also if you do get it, it's an extra treat. And then there's a part of me that wonders if there's going to be a romantic angle between the red blood cell and the white blood cell. Is this going to be sort of a forbidden love? Or because, their jobs are so different that they can't count on being together all the time, even though they do sort of serendipitously bump into each other a lot in these first 2 episodes, but I kind of pick up on a little flirtation there, and it's kind of funny, the idea of a red blood cell and a white blood cell maybe being smitten with one another. It's an unlikely pairing. They could probably have some fun with that. I don't know if they will. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's neat. And then platelets. I gotta talk about the platelets. Because, platelets are these clotting components, and they're small, they're not actually cells. They're more like fragments. And they're simpler than cells, and they're smaller than cells. So the show represents them as these cute little toddlers. I mean, you gotta see these toddlers. They're great. They're totes adorbs. Do people still say totes adorbs? Did people ever really say totes adorbs? But in episode 2, the platelets get their chance to shine, to show what they can really do. And I gotta tell you, it is great seeing this troop of little toddlers march in to save the day in the face of this horrible crisis. It gives me a good laugh. It's a real feel-good moment. And it just makes you happy that you're watching the show. And another really nice thing about this show is I think it seems kind of spoiler-proof. Like you're just enjoying the experience. It isn't the kind of show that really depends on a whole lot of plot twists. There's not some kind of mystery to be figured out. I'm not trying to crack the code of the rules about how the magic works or the power works or anything. I mean, I can just take it at face value. It's cute, it's fun, it's nice. I mean, how are you going to spoil some of it? Like red blood cells deliver oxygen. Yeah, we know that, right? White blood cells fight infection. That's not a surprise to anybody, is it? The fun is in watching the white blood cells do battle, not knowing that they do battle. And the white blood cells are pretty darn dedicated soldiers. So the neutrophils are like the front line. They're like these guards, and the white blood cell that we get to follow a lot as the main supporting character is a neutrophil. And they're like guards out on patrol. They have these little antennae that almost look like lollipops that can detect the antigens on the bacteria and know where the bacteria are. And as soon as they detect those bacteria, it's whoosh, knives out. Kill germ, die germ. I mean, one-track mind when it comes to those bacteria that show up. And then they report back to these helper T cells. And the helper T cells are like up in this elevated office that I'm going to call mission control because I don't know what else to call it. And then once the helper T cells kind of make an analysis of the situation, then they send out the really tough guys, the killer T cells. And the killer T cells are like the elite special forces. They're dressed all in black. They have these hats that have kill printed real big in all capital letters across the front of them. And like they are all about the business of killing these bacteria. When these guys come in, that means the fight is over. Like their whole attitude is sort of along the lines of no retreat, no surrender, and no mercy. Now the first 2 episodes do seem to deal almost, but not quite, exclusively with immunology and infectious disease, like specifically bacteria. And I guess that makes sense because that's where the action is and you want to hook your watchers early. But I would be curious about seeing how they handle some other things that happen with the human body. Like, I'd like to just see how they handle a virus instead of a bacteria, the difference in the immune cascade then. Or I'd like to see how they handle something like allergies, something that definitely I suffer from, it seems like, every other day of my life. And in a weird way, I'd kind of like to see what happens to the platelets if the person takes an aspirin. Because aspirin is a platelet inhibitor, and I just kind of want to see like what effect it would have. Would they just, the little cute toddlers get real drowsy and fall asleep? Like maybe they could represent the aspirin molecules, little teddy bears that they hide and fall asleep. I don't know, but I'd love to just see some of that. So I don't know if they're going to introduce those kind of things or not, but I just think that would be a cool thing to do. Now, there's a phrase I've used to describe some comic books that I've read and reviewed over the years. And that phrase is, it's like hot soup on a cold day. And what I mean by that is it's just really comforting. It's a very positive thing for me, but it's positive in a unique way. And for me, this show is that hot soup on a cold day. It is definitely a stress reliever. It's not too intense. It's fun. You can't help but smile while you're watching it. I like to pay attention, but if you miss one little bit here or there, you don't have to pore over all the details like I do, of course, with some of the shows I do the deep analysis on. It's just something I'm glad I found. I'm glad I checked out. I'm kind of curious to know if other people like it as much as I do. Curious, let me know down in the comments. If you do like it, what do you like about it? Maybe you like it for totally different reasons than I do. let me know. But that's all I've got to say for this video. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Take care.